Hello, we are talking with Henrik Kniberg. He's coming from Sweden, right?
Yes.
Hi, Henrik. I saw your presentation, which was really interesting about Agile, and one interesting aspect there was the graph you show about value focus and versus effort or output value. So, because in traditional projects, right, we are focusing on how much time people are working, or how much value they are output. I mean, or how much output they are putting there, but not necessarily on the value they are producing. Can you tell us a little bit more about this for our readers?
What I was talking about there was this tendency I've noticed, like you just mentioned, that a lot of projects and organizations spend a lot of their focus on things like time reports and resource utilization, and they're very concerned that people should be working many hours, etc. And it's not a very productive way of looking at a project if you're in a complex domain, because if you can get somebody who can solve the same problem in half the time, that's actually good. All of that person is working less, that's actually better. So you want to get away from that. Now, when you apply an agile method, like for example Scrum, which is the most popular one, then it automatically pulls you out of that mindset, because Scrum focuses on velocity more, right? You measure how much stuff got done during this sprint, and you don't measure how many hours people are spending on things. So Scrum and agile methods take you automatically away from the effort focus into an output focus. Same with Kanban, for example, it focuses on cycle time, end-to-end time. So in Scrum and Kanban and agile methods, you look at the thing itself rather than the number of hours people are producing, which is a step in the right direction. But many companies stop there. And what I want to emphasize is that the most successful companies that I've seen, they take it one step further and they say, who cares about velocity? Here's a team that has a lower velocity than that team, but this team with a lower velocity, they're producing more value. They found a way to solve the customer's problem with fewer features, and that's much better for everybody. So that's the evolution that I'm seeing happening, and I want to accelerate that.
Oh, it sounds really interesting. And I got a question on this. How do you measure the value? How people are aware about that value in the task, and how they can choose the task?
Right. That's actually one of the challenges, and I think the fact that that's a little tricky makes us sometimes fall back to measuring hours and velocity, right? Because hours is easy to measure, velocity is easy to measure, value is a little bit harder, but it's not rocket science. So you can look at examples of how different companies are doing it. For example, Spotify that I spend a lot of time with, they would look at things like MAU, monthly active users, and to what extent, if we make a feature this way or a feature in this way, to what extent will that impact how people use the product? You need to invest in some infrastructure for that. So if it's a software project, it's not so hard because you can measure these things, right? If it's a web product, then it's easy. There's tools for it. So measure how people use the product, use things like A/B testing to compare. But that's only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the more personal aspect. So make sure the people building the product get in contact with real users. They could, for example, take turns working in the support, right, to hear the complaints. Or they could watch videos of new users trying to understand the product. And that gives the developers a sense of who is the user and what are their struggles. And then those developers will tend to focus on the user needs more and not so much on the hours and velocity.
I see, and they can discover in this way the value of their task, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned also about Spotify. So you got more public awareness since you create the Spotify model. Can you tell us, our reader, more about what was the interesting fact there?
Well, first of all, I just want to emphasize that I didn't actually create the Spotify model, but I helped define it, I helped describe it. So what was the question again, sorry?
So what was specific to Spotify?
Okay. So what made that model popular?
Why was different than others?
So personally, I've been with that organization for quite a long time, and I've always been kind of fascinated by the culture, because it's the first time I've seen a company that seems to have a kind of truly agile culture built in. It doesn't mean everything is perfectly agile, but the culture, the default mindset is always agile, which is really interesting. So what I think maybe made this approach spread is that people get inspired by that. They see that, okay, everything around in Spotify is oriented around autonomy and trust, giving teams the ability to make decisions. And I think that's appealing to people, especially companies that are moving into a more complex domain and a faster changing world, they realize that traditional command and control or top-down decision making isn't suitable. It's just too slow. So we need something else, and maybe the Spotify model provided a code example, right?
I see. Okay, and which project do you think are not necessarily made for applying Agile?
Mainly, I would look at complexity. So projects that are inherently quite simple and repetitive. You've done this, let's say you're building web campaigns and you've built web campaigns every week. You do 20 campaigns per week and they're quite similar. In that case, you probably don't need Agile because whatever you're doing is probably already working. But if you're in a complex environment where the customer needs are a little unclear and they tend to change and the technology is unclear and tends to change, complex domain, you really need Agile. So I would look at that dimension, the complexity.
I see. And on the stage, you show us a really nice example with your kids and some volunteers about what it means to have some pool resources and making basically a difference between a stock highway and a normal highway. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I did this little demo that illustrates what happens when you focus on keeping people busy. So, and what tends to happen is the same thing that happens on a highway when the highway is full of cars. And what I wanted to illustrate was this mental kind of bug that sometimes happens. If you look at a paused picture of a highway that's full of cars, it looks very efficient, right? You've loaded your expensive road with full of cars. It's being utilized 100%, and that's great. But any developer and any ops person would know that, what happens with a CPU when it's running at 100%. That's bad, right? It's efficiently used, but everything is going to be slow. So we definitely don't want that to happen. And what I illustrated was how the principle of pull solves that to a certain extent. And what I mean by pull is, let's say, for example, in Scrum, if you have a sprint planning meeting. In a sprint planning meeting, the team pulls in a certain number of stories from a backlog. And if they pull in too many, they won't finish all of them. And they'll learn from that next time. So next time they'll pull in less. And it becomes a self-adjusting system. And as a result, you get just enough stories inside a sprint, which corresponds to just enough traffic on a highway.
Okay, I think I got it now better then.
So it's kind of basically limit the amount of cars that are allowed to come on the highway.
Agree.
And don't use first come, first serve. You prioritize by value. Right?
I see. Yeah, okay, makes really much sense now. Thanks. And you one of your clients, I'm not sure if it was your client or not, but you give us the example with Saab,
yes.
Creating a plane using Agile methodology,
yes.
And that's a non-software project with high complexity.
Yeah.
How was applied there?
So I didn't work on that project, but I visited them for a day and spent a day going around talking to people, and also read a paper on it. So my insight is limited, but what I saw surprised me because the project, it's definitely the most successful fighter plane project ever developed in terms of performance and price. And the way they did it was interesting. Everybody co-located, pretty much everybody using Scrum. Even people doing things like hardware and fuselage and procurement, but they're doing pretty much Scrum. And the pilots were co-located and are co-located with the teams, so the teams can try their latest build with a pilot can try the latest build from a software team that wrote that code today. So they get a very short feedback loop. So what they told me was the biggest success factor was co-location, Scrum with the fast feedback loops, and then pilots trying things out on a daily basis. Really interesting. Yeah. Although I also want to emphasize, though, that a fighter plane is also a lot of software.
Agree. Right. I mean, in our days, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. At the end, you give us that nice example with how you organize your barbecue in a procrastinating way. So you draw the Scrum task and to-dos, and people start to, choose tasks, right? Take tasks on the board and execute them.
Yeah.
How was this compared with traditional process giving task?
So I have some experience running barbecue parties at my house, and I've tried all kinds of models, including command and control. And what happens? And what the context was, I was having a barbecue party and I had a lot more guests showing up than I expected. Maybe it was 30 guests plus kids, and it was just a lot of people. And I realized my plan was going to break. So I started I just made a Scrum board pretty much, putting up stories like, well, we want meat on the barbecue, and we want fruits and drinks and in rough priority order. And then people showed up, and I asked them to, pair up with somebody, grab a note, and get that work done. Have a nice time while doing it, and if you need anything, talk to me. So I became kind of like more a Scrum Master. So I wasn't handing out tasks. I just put up the rough plan. I described the definition of done. Here's us sitting around the table having fun. And it was kind of self-organizing. So people would run around and they would, start chopping vegetables, and they would say, "Hey, Henrik, where's a good cutting knife?" And I would say, "It's over there." So I'd be like a Scrum Master. It's very different than command and control. It works actually surprisingly well because the guests think it's fun. Yep. They can pick tasks that they think is fun. Everybody has the same goal, and I don't have to run around controlling people. I just support them. So it's like a servant leadership kind of role. It also gave me more time to socialize instead of running around having to control things.
Yeah, sounds really good. I'll have to try it myself. Tell our readers what was the hacking there with your kids.
The hacking
and with the ice cream.
Yeah. It was very funny. So we had this board, and it was the first time I tried this. Now I do it on a regular basis, but the first time I tried it, and there was a lot of small children, even 3-year-olds, like literally 3-year-olds. And I noticed that the kids were observing the board and the grown-ups and wondering what's going on. And then I noticed it's like a light turned on in the heads of these little children. They're like, aha, the stuff that goes on the board happens, right? And wow, so the little kids, of course, hacked the system. So they put up papers with ice cream. And then, of course, the grown-ups had to give the kids ice cream. So that was a big aha for me, because I realized that these agile principles are really super powerful. Even a 3-year-old understood it without any instructions. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, really inspiring. So yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Henrik.
Okay, thank you.